Echad sha'alti me'et Adonai ota vakesh shivti b'veit Adonai kol yemei chayai. One thing I ask of you, this is my request. Let my rest be in the house of God all the days of my life. I keep coming back to this verse from Psalm 27, the psalm for the holiday season, as I live in exile in Colorado, far from my home and my Judaism at Hadar. And I think it exemplifies what many of us are feeling. We're used to understanding the liturgy metaphorically, that obviously the words are not directly relevant to our lives, but we're still committed to saying them as written, so we have to rethink what the words mean in order to do that. The clearest example for me is from Tachanun, a line in the liturgy I avoided saying for many years. Al shiktsunu kutumat hanida. Do not make us repulsive, like the impurity of a menstruating woman. I avoided saying this because the plain sense is that a woman's period is repulsive, like a sheketz, like a non-kosher creepy crawly. Eventually I realized that this was the very last line in all of the liturgy that I avoided saying, and that seemed a bit ridiculous. So I reinterpreted the line to understand Nida not as a menstruating woman, but as an exile, someone who was banned from the camp, like Nidu, the communal ban. It's not an impossible reading, but it's also not the literal sense, but it allowed me to say the line. We've all, I'm sure, performed some mental gymnastics like this one to maintain our relationship with our liturgy, so rooted in the Middle Ages that it doesn't seem to speak to us at all. For me, this all changed in March. The liturgy is no longer metaphorical for me. It is simply and plainly literal because it speaks exactly to our situation. I came across this passage from Vayikra Rabbah in March, when everything was starting, before I knew how bad it was going to be. There are 4 opinions about the fragility of life that compound each other. Amar Rav, Tish'im v'tisha ba'ayin ve'echad bidei shamayim. Said Rav, 99 people die of bad luck, the ayin hara, to one who dies naturally through the hands of heaven. Rabbi Chanina v'Rabbi Natan amrei travaihu, Tish'im v'tisha betzina ve'echad bidei shamayim. Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Natan both say 99 people die of cold to one naturally. Rabbi Yishmael bar Rabbi Nachman b'shem Rabbi Natan amar, Tish'im v'tisha b'sharev ve'echad bidei shamayim. Rabbi Ishmael bar Rabbi Nachman in the name of Rabbi Natan, 99 people die of heat to one naturally. Rabbanan amrin, Tish'im v'tisha b'pshia ve'echad bidei shamayim. The majority opinion, 99 people die of negligence to one naturally. This last one really hits home 6 months later. This passage highlights how precarious temperature, luck, and even life was in pre-modernity. The passage is clearly hyperbole. They don't literally mean that 99 people die for one person naturally, but it emphasizes how few of people in their world died of old age. What these last 6 months have taught me is that is not as far from our modern world as we like to think. What 5780 has taught me is simply, modernity is a lie. Modernity and all of its promises of being shielded from natural disaster, of living in an enlightened republic which has as its goal the protection of its citizens, modernity either was always a lie, or else in 2020, it's over. Not only are we beset by natural forces that we thought us immune to, but we live under a government that operates on patronage, that state resources are only given out if there is tangible benefit to the increasing influence and power of the state itself, which sounds a lot more like the Roman Empire than any modern democracy. We think of COVID times as extraordinary, but in fact, the extraordinary thing is that this hasn't happened to us in 100 years. We don't live in the modern world anymore, if we ever did. Now, we live in the pre-modern world. And this is why the liturgy is suddenly electric for us. It and all of our tradition was created in an environment not unlike this one, and was built to speak to the people living under those circumstances, which now includes us. I once taught a shir at Kilat Hadar, trying to justify a commitment to tradition from first principles. I don't have to justify it anymore. It is self-evidently relevant. Here's one simple example, also from Tachanun, which has swiftly become for me the most relevant part of the daily liturgy. Al ta'azvenu Adonai Eloheinu, al tirchak mimenu, ki nafshenu katzara mecherev mishvi umidever umimagifa umikol tzara v'yagon. Do not abandon us, God our Lord. Do not be far from us, for we are in distress because of sword, captivity, pestilence, plague, and all suffering and trouble. And of course, you can't fail to notice Unatan Tokef. Mi v'mayim, mi v'esh, mi v'cherev, mi v'chaya, mi v'rash, mi v'magefa. If you ever thought that these lines were metaphors, that is not possible anymore. Suddenly the words speak to us as they were intended to, and there's no shying away from them. The end of Psalm 27 tells us what all of this means. Kaveh al Adonai chazak v'ametz libecha, v'kaveh al Adonai. Hope in God, strengthen your heart, and hope in God. The lesson of all this is, as we have suddenly realized, as the liturgy and the tradition are trying to teach us, the only thing we can depend on is God. The Torah even thinks of this attitude as a desiree. When comparing the land flowing with milk and honey to the land of Egypt, Sefer Dvarim emphasizes that Egypt is like a gan yarak, a vegetable garden, where all you have to do to get water for your crops is go to the Nile with a bucket. But Eretz Israel gets water from rain. No amount of your own effort can produce it, and thus anyone who lives there depends on God's grace. Living in Eretz Israel highlights for us the true situation which the ease of Egypt, or the ease of modernity, obscures for us, that our lives are precarious, and anything we have comes not from our own effort, but through lucky circumstance, and as gifts from God. You don't have to be in Eretz Israel to understand this, but the point of Devarim is that those particular circumstances make it easier for you not to forget. So where does this leave us? Our traditional texts and our liturgy that were in some way closed to us, only relevant after sometimes extensive reinterpretation, have suddenly been blown open, and we've realized that they speak directly to us and reveal for us that God is the only dependable one. What now? I would say two things. First, and this may not work for you, but I find comfort in the idea that our circumstances are not new, that humans throughout history have gone through similar hardships and come out the other side. And to be clear, even given everything happening in the world, it seems to me obvious that this is still the best time ever to be alive. Added to that, a whole world of comfort from tradition has been opened to us. We can read our texts and be supported by them in new ways. When we ask God to save us, now we mean it and can be comforted by it in a way we never were before. The second part is provided by Psalm 27 that I quoted before. Kaveh al Adonai chazak v'emetz libecha v'kaveh al Adonai. And I don't mean this hope in a passive way. Hope requires strength of heart and commitment, and most importantly, action. For as Rav Shai teaches, hope is the antidote to despair. Despair leads to inaction. Everything is terrible. Why should I do anything to stop it? It's too much. While true hope in God leads to action. My brother once explained to me what was distinctive about the Bible's mythology in the ancient world compared to that of two major world powers, Egypt and Babylon, in the following way. Egyptian mythology denies that change is possible. Egypt is eternal. When you die, you take all your possessions with you and you continue living your life. Not even death is real change in Egypt. Babylonian mythology admits that change is possible, but it's always for the worse. The ancient kings were larger than life. The world of the present is nothing but a shadow of its former self. The Tanakh, however, thinks emphatically that not only is change possible, but it is sometimes for the better. Certainly not always, but sometimes. As an aside, one of the things modernity fooled us into thinking, I think, is that change is always for the better, which is demonstrably false. This attitude is at the root of the prophetic and messianic tradition, the capacity to imagine another world, a better one. It's not a guarantee, but it's always a possibility. And this is the first step to action. Once you commit to your hope that a better world is possible, even if unlikely, and you can see the gap between the world as it is and the world as it could and should be, that's the first step to closing that gap. This is the approach we need for 5781. The hope for a new world and an inkling of how to get there. And it all starts with realizing where we are, thrown back into a pre-modern world, ready to receive the wisdom of our ancestors, but remembering what the modern world could and should be, and committing ourselves anew to make it into reality. Shana Tova.